I was born into a prominent and affluent family in Kingsley, Scotland, the younger of 2 daughters. We were the only children in our family, and though my sister was 6 years older, we didn't have much in common. I was only 12 when she got married. I remembered the day so clearly, the wedding full of joy, laughter, and music. But all I felt was a deep sadness as I watched her leave, taking her new husband, Mr. Harrington, with her to Edinburgh. She had always been kinder to me than my own mother, so it felt like I was losing a part of myself when she left. A year after her departure, we received a letter from Mr. Harrington. My sister had fallen ill, and she wanted to come back to stay with us in Kingsley, seeking comfort in the family home. Although I was saddened by her illness, I couldn't help but feel excitement at the thought of seeing her again. My father told me they would be leaving Edinburgh on Sunday and would arrive here by Tuesday evening. But when that evening came, I waited and waited. The hours seemed to drag on, and soon it was well past midnight. Then, just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard it a distant sound, faint but distinct. I rushed out of my room and called out to my father. We stood at the front door, listening in the dark, but there was nothing, no sight of them. Only the eerie sound of crying in the distance, then silence. My father and I exchanged puzzled looks, unable to understand what had happened. The next day, we received devastating news. My sister had passed away in the early hours of the morning, at the very time we were waiting for her outside. The grief that washed over me that day never truly left. For the next 2 years, I lived in a haze of sorrow, withdrawing from the world. The pain of losing her felt unbearable. Meanwhile, Mr. Harrington remarried soon after, and I couldn't help but feel angered that he had moved on so quickly. At just 14, I became the sole heir to a wealthy family, and it wasn't long before suitors came calling. But none of them were right for me. I wasn't ready for marriage. When I turned 16, my mother took me to Aberdeen, promising that I would find a better class of men there, wealthier, more refined, and indeed Aberdeen offered much more excitement. I began to feel the joy of life again, meeting new people, dancing, and laughing. Yet my mother remained obsessed with finding a suitable husband for me. One evening, as I was preparing for bed, she came into my room and mentioned Lord Samuel Blackwood, a man from a rich family. She insisted that he loved me and wanted to marry me. I told her I couldn't marry a man I didn't love, but my mother was adamant. She painted a picture of how lucky I was to have such an opportunity. After a long, silent night of contemplation, I reluctantly agreed. Lord Samuel Blackwood and I married the following spring. 2 days after our wedding, we left Kingsley for his family estate in Marwell. The house was set by a river, surrounded by trees and flowers, and for a brief moment, I felt a deep sense of happiness. My new life seemed like a dream, with laughter and warmth filling the air. But then, everything shifted. Margaret, the housekeeper, introduced me to the household. But when I arrived at my bedroom, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. A large black coat standing ominously in the doorway. I was filled with dread. When Margaret explained the significance of the coat, I learned it was a sign of impending doom for the Blackwood family. Something bad always followed its appearance. The atmosphere at Marwell shifted further when Lord Samuel Blackwood one day warned me never to enter the back rooms of the house or the little garden by the back door. He seemed fearful, and though I didn't understand why, I promised to obey. A month passed, and I met the woman who would change everything. I had gone for a walk in the gardens and returned to my room only to find a strange woman sitting by the fire. She was wearing a black coat and had white, sightless eyes, she claimed to be Lord Samuel's wife, and told me to leave. My world crumbled in that moment. When Lord Samuel arrived, he was furious but said nothing. His reaction only deepened my confusion. Soon after, I began to notice a chilling distance in my husband. He grew quieter, more withdrawn, and I began to fear for my safety. One night, the blind woman came to me again, holding a knife. She told me that Lord Samuel had married her before me, and that I must leave the house, or else she would kill me. I shared the terrifying encounter with my husband the next morning, but he only dismissed it, insisting the woman was insane. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. I wanted answers, but no one was willing to provide them. The days wore on, and the tension in Marwell became unbearable. My once vibrant life, filled with laughter and excitement, had dissolved into a constant haze of fear and uncertainty. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, made my heart race. Lord Samuel Blackwood, once a man I hoped to build a life with, had become a stranger, locked in a battle of silence and evasion. His growing distance only fueled my dread. Then, one evening, as I sat by the window, staring out into the endless expanse of trees that seemed to close in around the estate, I felt a presence shift in the air. It was her again, the woman in the black coat. She stood in the garden, motionless, her sightless eyes piercing the night. There was no need for words. Her intentions were clear. She was a force to be reckoned with, and I could no longer deny her presence. With a trembling hand, I reached for the letter my mother had sent, a reminder of the world I had left behind. The thought of returning to Kingsley crossed my mind, but the ties that bound me to this place, to my marriage, seemed unbreakable. Yet, I could not shake the feeling that my safety was in jeopardy. That night, unable to sleep, I wandered through the mansion, my steps leading me to the back rooms, the forbidden rooms Lord Samuel had warned me about. The door creaked open, and I stepped into the darkness, heart pounding. I could feel the weight of the past in the air, memories, pain, and secrets held within these walls. It was then I found it. A hidden chamber at the far end of the hall, locked behind a door that had been bolted shut for years. The room was cold, the air thick with dust, yet something in the atmosphere made it impossible to leave. Inside, there was an old portrait of a woman, her likeness disturbingly familiar. As I studied it, a chill ran down my spine. It was her, the woman in the black coat. But how? She had died years ago, or so I thought. Confusion swirled within me as I raced back to my room, only to find the blind woman sitting by my bed, waiting. She held a letter in her hands, her expression unreadable. Without saying a word, she handed it to me. The letter was from Lord Samuel, written in a frantic, almost desperate tone. It explained everything, the secrets, the lies, and the tragedy that had unfolded within these walls. Lord Samuel had been married before me to this woman, whose spirit had never left the house. She had died tragically, and her soul, trapped between worlds, had been haunting Marwell ever since. The black coat, a symbol of death, had been left as a warning. The woman in the garden, the blind woman, had once been my predecessor, and now she sought revenge. The letter also revealed that Lord Samuel had never truly loved me. He had married me out of obligation, driven by the desperate need to break free from the curse that had gripped his family for generations. The love he had once felt for his first wife had never faded, and it was that love, bound by the curse, that kept me trapped in this house. Tears welled up in my eyes as I read the final words of the letter. A confession that shattered everything I had believed in. Lord Samuel, the man I had married, had known the truth all along. He had known the danger, the power of the curse, and had chosen to marry me anyway, trapping me in a life of misery and despair. But it wasn't too late. I still had a choice. As I stood there holding the letter in my hands, I realized that I had the power to break free. I could leave, return to the world I had once known, and escape the darkness that had consumed me. Or I could confront the haunting past, face the woman who had been my predecessor, and end the curse once and for all. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The choice would come at a cost, perhaps the greatest cost of all. But as I looked into the eyes of the blind woman, I realized one thing. I was no longer afraid. I had lived in fear long enough. It was time to take control of my fate. I left Marwell behind, stepping into the unknown, guided only by my courage and the hope for a new beginning. The curse, though powerful, was no match for my resolve. The woman in the black coat, the blind woman, faded into the shadows as I stepped into the light of a new day. Lord Samuel Blackwood never sought me out again. His love for me, bound by guilt and fear, was a distant memory, and the weight of the curse lifted from both our lives. The estate of Marwell fell silent, the echoes of the past finally silenced by my choice. And so I began again, free at last.